Assalamu alaikum. We will begin with lecture 19 today. In the last lecture, I looked at one other Victorian poet with you by the name Matthew Arnold. Today, I'm going to discuss Alfred Tennyson with you. Alfred Tennyson, you shall see, shares similar themes with Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold, as I explained to you in the previous lecture, treats the doubts and the changing values of the Victorian society. Alfred Tennyson, in a similar way, looks at the changes taking place in the Victorian society, but in his own way he expresses his own doubts and his own fears that are heavily influenced by his own personal experiences and his personal lives and problems in his personal life. So Tennyson is a far more greater Victorian poet than perhaps maybe Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold is more renowned for his works of prose and his critical documentation on the values of Victorian age. But you shall see that Tennyson is a remarkable poet as far as his poetry is concerned. He experiments a great deal with different poetic forms, and he's written numerous poems. There are lyrics, there are ballads, and there are other forms of poems that he has experimented with. And apart from this, he was also the poet laureate in the Victorian age. In the long period of Queen Victoria, throughout he served as the poet laureate for England, and which was with this title actually, it gave him renown, and it gave him what no poet ever got in his own lifetime, a publicity. So he was very well known, even in his lifetime, a famous poet of the Victorian age. So Alfred Tennyson, before we look at the poems or analyze the poems, we shall briefly take a look at his life and at the kind of poetry that he wrote and the different themes that he explored in his poems. In this lecture today, I am going to discuss and analyze two poems with you. The first one has the title Break, 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 and the other one is the Idle Tears. So these two poems we are going to analyze in this lecture of today, but let's look at the poet. Now, Alfred Lord Tennyson was born in 1809 and he died in 1892. You can see his lifespan covers the whole of the Victorian period. He achieved what so many poets and writers throughout the centuries were unable to achieve: fame and success during his lifetime. So he was able to get, as I mentioned earlier on, what nobody in his lifetime, in their lifetime, was able to achieve. He got fame and success even in his lifetime. In 1850, after the publication of In Memoriam, he was installed to the position of Poet Laureate. And as the Poet Laureate, he represented the literary voice of the nation, and as such, he made occasional pronouncements on political affairs. Naturally, he was a poet representing the sentiments of England, so he took care to take up in his poems, in his poetry, the themes that troubled his nation. So he made occasional topics as his central theme in his poems on the troubling political affairs of his country. For example, the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade describes a disastrous battle in the Crimean War, and he praises the heroism of the British soldiers there. So he became the voice of England in the Victorian age. In 1859, Tennyson published the first 4 Idylls of the Kings, a group of 12 blank verse narrative poems tracing the story of the legendary King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And it was this collection which he dedicated to Prince Albert, which enjoyed so much popularity with the royal family that it saw him, the Tennysons, remaining throughout as Poet Laureate during Victorian era's reign. So because his poetry celebrated the heroism, the political power of England, his poetry was cherished and upheld by the monarchy also. It was upheld by the Queen herself, and thus his voice became the representative voice of the Victorian era. As a poet, as I've just told you, he was a representative of his age. He entered fully into the moods of his age. And his poetry is remarkable for its metrical variety, for rich descriptive imagery, and exquisite verbal melodies. When we come across the poems, you shall find these qualities in his poetry. So he has this exquisite metrical variety. Metrical variety meaning he changes the meter of the poem, the meter of the lines changes. So his poems exhibit a metrical variety which in which he surpasses many other poets. And he uses imagery, descriptive imagery, which is again a hallmark of Tennyson's poetry. And then there is assonance, consonance, alliteration, repetition, those verbal devices that he uses that create melody in the poem. His poetry also dealt with the doubts and difficulties of the age. And in this case, he's similar to Matthew Arnold. He shares the same sentiments that Matthew Arnold had, the doubts and the difficulties that the age was passing through regarding the Christian faith and the increasing scientific rationalism. And so in his poems we find that he treats the same subject that troubled Matthew Arnold also in a slightly different manner. He's talking more and more about the question of man's nature and man's destiny with regard to this all-powering nature or the universe surrounding man. So man's position in the world, or man's destiny, or man's existence, or man's limited and small presence in this big universe, these are the questions that trouble Tennyson. So, and these were brought about by the new discoveries in the scientific domain. So you shall see that Tennyson takes upon the same themes that Matthew Arnold touched upon in his poetry, but he is going to treat them rather differently. He is more concerned with man's position in the world and man's destiny regarding the rest of the world, the nature and the universe. But we shall also see that since he suffered from numerous personal problems in his own lifetime, his poetry is also inclined to be melancholy. Like Arnold, when he views when he pitches man against nature, he tends to be melancholic. He sees no ray of hope at the end of the tunnel for man. But through his poetic mastery and the distinctive harmony that he achieves in the poem, we get a feeling of reassurance and even serenity through his poems, unlike that of Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold's melancholic state is declarative, and it is declarative and it is definitive, and it is as if it is absolute. But with Tennyson, when we read his poems, and although they are touched upon by the melancholic tone, we get a feeling of assurance and of serenity, which is the result of the beautiful harmony that he creates in his verse. He was of much discussion and discourse amongst the group of critics that emerged in the 20th century with the name practical critics or the new critics. And they took keen interest in studying Tennyson poetry, and they found it remarkable in terms of the ambiguities that are found in his poetry, and ironies and the paradoxes that are to be found in his poems, but yet creating a harmony, yet giving the poem a kind of a diffuse quality. So his poems have been considered remarkable in that sense. And Tennyson may be seen as the first great English poet to be fully aware of the new picture of man's place in the universe revealed by modern science. I've discussed this earlier also, but this is with a new emphasis. So Tennyson is the first great English poet who is aware of this new picture of man's place in the universe. So he's also significant in that regard also, that when he sees this battle between faith and the scientific rationalism, he views it as a changing and evolving man's position with regard to the universe. And we shall see that this feeling sometimes evoked fear in him, and sometimes it gave him a greater understanding and depth to the answers and to the queries that baffled the Victorian age and most of the writers of his time. So we will find that although he is also burdened with the same worries and with the same problems that Matthew Arnold was, but he assumes more maturity, he displays more understanding, and he exhibits more depth than Matthew Arnold. And there is serenity, there is assurance, there is peace, and there is tranquility that comes out and that is overpowering after we read his poems, which is not the case with Matthew Arnold. So this was a brief about Alfred Tennyson. I would like you to keep this in mind, and when we look at these poems today, I would expect you to keep these significant characteristics or traits in mind. Both the poems that we are going to do today, you shall see that they employ simple language, simple diction, and both are lyrics, so they are not very long also. So, and they are easily understood also. But it is the complexity of paradoxes and ambiguities and other poetic devices that he employs, that he uses, that give his poem or lend his poems a greater depth than other poets. So let's look at the first poem. The poem Break, Break, Break was written in 1834, and it was a year after Tennyson's friend Arthur Hallam died. And Tennyson was so close to this friend that he felt his death for a long, long time, and in most of his poems he's mourning his death. This poem also serves as an elegy. An elegy is a poem which is written after, which is a sad poem written after the demise of a loved one. So the poem is an elegy which describes Tennyson's feelings of loss after Arthur Hallam died, and his feelings of isolation when he is staying at this place in Lincolnshire, which was a place not so far off from where he had spent time with Arthur Hallam. And in the poem we shall see the permanent and the lasting images are contrasted with the temporariness of the human life. Man passes away so quickly, but the scene of nature remains the same. This is a central theme of the poem. The temporariness of man's life is contrasted with the permanence of nature. So that is the main theme of the poem. Let us now look at the poem and see how Tennyson explores the idea. The poem is written in 4 stanzas, as you shall see, and they are all simply and beautifully composed. The first stanza. Break, break, break on thy cold grey stones, O sea, and I would that my tongue could utter the thoughts that arise in me. The very first line, break, 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 the word is repeated 3 times, and this repetition highlights and it emphasizes the poet's own feeling. His feeling of utter isolation, his feeling of utter desolation, his feeling of utter dejection, and his feeling of utter breaking down of emotions and feelings. The poet at the moment is standing on a beach, looking towards the sea, and he sees the sea in turmoil. The sea waves are coming and hitting at the cliffs, at the stony cliffs on the beach, and it is the poet observes this continuous motion while he is standing at the beach and watching the scene. And so the waves are coming one upon the other and hitting at the stony cliffs on the beach. So that is why he repeats the word, because just to give us an idea, as the motion of the waves is unstoppable, and it is repeated without any break. In the same way, the poet also insists on repetition. He says break, 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 as if saying, okay, go on, continue, go on, and repeat your process. So he says break, break, break. On thy cold grey stones, O sea, the cold grey stones, O sea. Look at the pain with which he addresses sea. He's addressing the sea. He's calling upon the sea. He's talking to the sea. But look at the pain with which he addresses sea. He says, O sea. So he's hurt with this continuous, repetitive act of the sea and its waves. He says, break, O waves, break. Break yourself, hit at the cold grey stones. He could have used any other adjectives for these stones, but he uses cold and grey. These two adjectives, they show what the poet himself is feeling. He himself is feeling cold, and he himself is feeling grey. Cold has to do with this numbness of feeling, has to do with fear, and grey also has to do with pessimism. Grey has to do with the end of liveliness, with the end of optimism, with the end of happiness. So he is deliberately evoking feelings through these adjectives that he wants to correspond with his own feelings. So he says, break, break, break on thy cold grey stones, O sea. So, O sea, you shall continue with your motion, and you shall never stop. You have been going on like this forever and ever, and you shall go on in the future forever and ever. So he says, you will not stop. And I would that my tongue could utter the thoughts that arise in me. Then I would. Now there is this desire with this phrase, would, I would. This is a wish. When we have an extreme desire or a wish, we use this expression. So he says, I would, meaning he wants to say, I wish, I desire that my tongue could utter the thoughts that arise in me. He says, you can break across, you can break and hit at the cliffs, and you can produce a noise, and you can do whatever you want. But he says, the waves that arise in me, that waves, the lava that is inside my heart, he says, how am I going to express that? How is that going to come out? How is that going to be expressed? So he is doing, over here, he's comparing his own feelings with that of the activity of the sea and the waves. So he says, the sea has gone on. The sea has been there for a long time. One is this idea of permanence of sea, of nature, and the other is this littleness of man. And the second idea in this stanza is that the sea is able to express itself, but he says that I cannot. The waves that are inside me, the emotions that are rising up inside me, he says, I wish I could also utter them. I wish I could also explain them. I wish I could also get catharsis by expressing them, by talking about them. So he's talking about his own pent-up emotions. And then in stanza 2, you see, he shall look around. Now he turns away from this, the sea waves hitting at the sea cliffs, and he looks at the beach. And what does he notice at the beach? He says, "Oh, well for the fisherman's boy that he shouts with his sister at play. Oh, well for the sailor lad that he sings in his boat on the bay." Again, there is pain. He starts every thought with "oh," with the expression of pain. He says, "Oh, it is well. It is well for the fisherman's boy, the son of the fisherman, to shout as he's playing with his sister, to enjoy as he plays with his sister, to feel happy as he plays with his sister on the beach." And then again he says, "Oh, it is all well for the sailor's lad, for the son of the sailor, to sing in his boat on the bay." Maybe he's in love and he's singing of his beloved and he's happy. So he says it is all right for them, for these young people, for these children and for this young lad to go on and to feel happy with their life, not knowing what troubles are waiting for them. So he says it is all right for them to feel happy and to be able to express their happiness. But the poet here now is contrasting their happiness and their ability to express their happiness with his own inability to express his own feelings. So he's contrasting his own mood with these people that he mentions here. He's admiring their innocent joy, and he is sorry that he cannot share it. He cannot share their joy, because the poet's heart is heavy with loss. The poet's heart is heavy with sorrow. The poet's heart is heavy with lament, and the poet's heart is heavy with a sense of loss at having lost his best friend. In stanza 3, he looks upon another scene, and this time these are the ships. He says, "And the stately ships go on to their haven under the hill. But oh, for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of a voice that is still." So again there is pain in this third stanza also, because in third line he says, "Oh." When he remembers his friend, the pain comes back to him. But first he says, "The stately ships go on to the haven under the hill." He sees the ships passing quietly, going back to their rest places, to their haven behind the hill. So he says everything is going about its own way. Nobody's bothered, nobody's feeling as a poet is feeling, and everything is different from the way the poet himself is feeling. The ships go on about their usual routine with their normal business. The children on the beach are playing and displaying their happiness in their own ways. The lad is in love and he's singing songs and is untroubled by any thoughts of loss and of separation. So he's contrasting and he's looking upon these different scenes, and the more he observes, the more he feels that at his loss. The more he feels the pain of his loss, the more he feels the sorrow that he has lost something very dear. Because everything else around him seems to have, everybody else around him seems to have something to hold on to, but the poet feels that he does not have anyone to hold on to, because he says, "Oh, for the touch of a vanished hand." So the friend whom he counted on, the friend who was with him in all the troubled times in his life, who supported him in his troubled times, he says, I wish and I regret his touch, the touch of his soft hands and his support, and the sound of a voice that is still. So there's this sensuous imagery because from the sense of seeing he comes to the sense of touch, and then he comes to the sense of hearing. He says, so the touch, I still miss that hand that in so many times when I was aggrieved, when I was in grief, that consoled me. And he says, I still miss the sound of the voice that was dear to me. So he says, although everything else in nature is unchanged and it's going on as it was from the very beginning, he says his condition has changed. And in stanza 4, you see the beauty of Tennyson that we talked about earlier on, the ability of Tennyson to achieve a harmony and unity in the poem. After he's talked about these ambiguities, complexes, you shall see that he, in the final stanza, he assumes control, because he is going to achieve a harmony by linking all these images together. So he says, break, break, break at the foot of thy crags, O sea. So the similar idea that he introduced in the first line, the similar words that are repeated now, but he changes this, the second line. He says, break, 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 O sea, go on. So all those scattered broken images that he introduced in the second and the third stanzas of the children, of the young lad, and of the stately ships, he's now connecting them to this main theme, which is the waves breaking at the cliff. So he says, everything in nature goes on, everything in nature is going on in the same way as it used to. So he says, break, break, break at the foot of thy crags, O sea. Thy crags, O sea. Again he addresses the sea in the final stanza, and he says, break at the foot of these cliffs and mountains, at the low vestiges of this cliff. But the tender grace of a day that is dead will never come back to me. So this is the unifying effect, because now he says that you shall go on, your waves shall go on breaking at the cliff, lurching themselves at the beach against the stones, and splashing with a noise, and the motion will continue, and everything else in nature will remain the same. But the painful thing for the poet is that he says the tender grace of a day that is dead. So he is talking about, he's creating for us an image of a day coming to an end. And he says that day which has once gone, the day which has once become past, the day which has once become history, it can never be brought back. And you all know that. So once a day has gone out of our lives, it can never be brought back. That is why we tell each other to cherish each day, because we can never bring back what is gone. So he's using the idea of a day that has gone, but he's talking about those memories. He's talking about those days that he spent with his friend Arthur Hallam, and he says, all that, though that time is now gone, and I can never bring it back. Nothing can ever bring it back, because he says, will never come back to me. So there is a lament here, there is extreme sorrow here, there is extreme dejection here. And this refrain, or this repetition, the very first line which is repeated, it emphasizes this refrain or this repetition, it emphasizes poet's grief. So the poem is composed in a simple language, and it employs simple diction and simple words. But you can see how beautifully Tennyson has expressed his grief here. A brief analysis of the poem and a brief look at some of the themes in the poem. Just as I've just explained, the poem is full of the sad and the nostalgic tone. Nostalgia is the feeling of or the yearning or remembrance of old time and old days. So the poet is remembering and is cherishing the memories that he spent with his friend Arthur Hallam, and he realizes that he can never bring back that time, but those memories, those cherished moments, instead of making the poet happy, they somehow leave him melancholic, they somehow leave him extremely sad because of his extreme sense of loss after his friend was gone. And the poem presents the seaside image. It is complete with a wild sea, playing children, fishermen and sailing boats, but Tennyson manipulates these elements to reveal a poem about death and loss. So this is an important point. You see, the poem presents the images of life. The sea is an image of life. The sea is an image of continuity in life. The sea is an image of fertility. The sea is a powerful metaphor for nature, for permanence, for continuity, for fertility. And the images at beach that Tennyson also gives us of children playing, of the lad singing, and the boats passing by, these are all images of life. So although the poet uses these images of life in the poem, but the theme that he's exploring is that of life, not of life, but of loss and death. So his major concern is loss, the loss of the good times, and of death, the death of his friend. The themes of memory and nostalgia are also an important part of the poem, and there is this distinct feeling that Tennyson is evoking the memory of someone he has lost, and we know who he has lost. So memory and nostalgia is another theme of the poem. And we saw that poet has drawn pictures of permanent and lasting images in contrast with the temporariness of human life. Now he uses images which are permanent and lasting, like the image of the sea, like the image of the cliffs. So these are lasting images. The mountains, the sky, the sea, they have been there from the beginning of the earth, from the beginning of our universe. From the time when man started exploring this world, they have been there. So these are permanent images of nature, but he's contrasting, puts them in contrast to the temporary human life. The concept of death and the concept of temporariness of human life is emphasized in the poem. And it is also emphasized in those other human images that he creates, because those young children playing on the beach, they will never remain young. Although they're happy now, but they will grow old, and they may also experience loss. The lad who may be in love has not experienced grief, but he may experience grief as he grow older also. So their time will not remain the same forever, like those objects in nature. So it is this temporariness of human existence that Tennyson is actually bringing into focus in the poem. The sea is used as a metaphor. I have already explained it to you, and the sea is a metaphor to emphasize permanence and to show that man passes away and changes, man's life changes, but the sea remains the same, and it is always there. The world continues to be busy and beautiful, but the happy moments of one's life never stay. This is another theme of the poem. And there are a number of poetic devices used. He uses alliteration, he uses repetition, he also uses metaphor, he uses personification. So with a blend of these emotions and contrasts, he also, I haven't written it here, but he also uses contrasts. So by using these poetic devices, he is able to explore his different themes in the poem, and he is also able to give the poem a harmony with the repetitive devices and with the refrain that he repeats in the last stanza. So this was his poem, Break, 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 in which he was exploring his themes, the theme of memory, the theme of nostalgia, the theme of loss and melancholy, the theme of temporariness of life and the permanence of nature. We are now going to look at this other poem by Alfred Tennyson with the title Tears, Idle Tears, and you shall see that the poem is focused upon similar ideas. Briefly about the poem first. Now, Tears, Idle Tears was published in 1847 when it first appeared as a lyric embedded within Tennyson's longer poem, The Princess, a Medley. And this poem is a lyric poem, and it centers on bittersweet memories of the past. Again, nostalgia, memory are the themes of this poem. And the poem is unrhymed iambic pentameter, which is blank verse, but we shall see that several lines do not conform strictly to this pattern. And the poem evokes complex emotions and moods through the mastery of language. And he uses a lot of poetic devices in this poem also. Let us now look at the poem and see how through the different images that Tennyson evokes, he is able to express his emotions and he is able to express his feelings. Remember, I told you in the opening of this lecture that he employs complex imagery, and that is a significant definition of his poems, significant characteristic trait of his poems. So in the previous poem also, Break, 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 you saw how he's employing different images, and through those images he's able to give us contrasts. He's able to make us look at two different things and weigh them together, and then he is able to resolve those the conflict. In this poem also, we shall see that he uses and employs different images, and he's going to build his poem upon images. He's going to use certain paradoxes, certain conflicts, certain other devices, and he is going to resolve those conflicts also to achieve harmony in the poem, which is for which he is a great master. So the poem also evokes several images. Stanza 1. Let's look at the first stanza. He says, Tears, idle tears, I know not what they mean. Tears from the depth of some divine despair rise in the heart and gather to the eyes, in looking on the happy autumn fields and thinking of the days that are no more. So in this stanza, we see that we get the feeling that poet is somehow, he's grieved, he's overcome with extreme grief by some sense of loss. Because he starts the line, the poem with tears. He says, tears, the tears are flowing down his eyes. He's crying, and the tears are flowing down his eyes, but he does not know why he's crying. He does not know why his emotions are causing him to cry. This is why he calls these tears idle tears. He's unable to explain from where they come from, and he's unable to explain why they're coming out. So they are idle. So the first important thing to note is that the word tears is repeated twice, but when he repeats them, he explains them, and the adjective that he uses is idle for tears. He's calling them idle, and when he calls them idle, it means he does not know why they're coming. He does not know why he's crying, and he does not know what is the cause, what is the reason that the tears are flowing out of his eyes. Because he explains in the next part, he says, I know not what they mean. So he says, I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know why I'm feeling like this. Tears, but tears are flowing down my eyes. Tears are coming out of my eyes. And the tears, in the next line, we get the idea that he knows where they're coming from. He says, tears from the depth of some divine despair rise in the heart and gather to the eyes. He says, tears are arising in my heart. He tells us the whole passage. He tells us the whole movement of his emotions. He tells us a whole process that results in this outpouring from his eyes. So he says that my emotions are aroused in my heart. So they arise primarily, these tears, from my heart. And then from my heart, they come to the eyes. And from the eyes, then they fall. So they come from some divine despair. This is now paradox. He is linked two opposing concepts together. He says divine but also despair. Despair means no hope, and divine means hope. So he's pitched them both together. He says tears are coming from depth of some divine despair. He's trying to give us the idea that he is feeling very dejected, that he has no sense of hope, that he has lost all hope, that something has made him lose all hope. So he says, my tears are coming from some source of despair. There is some feeling hidden in me, hidden deep inside me, and there is some sense hidden deep inside me which is no hope, which is of no hope, which gives no hope, and which tells me that there is no hope. And then he tells us where he is, and he says, these tears rise to my eyes in looking on the happy autumn fields and thinking of the days that are no more. So now he also tells us why he's crying, as opposed to the first line when he said idle tears. He then goes on to tell us where those tears are coming from, and then in the last two lines he tells us why they're coming out. He says, I'm looking at the happy autumn fields. Again, we can call it conflicting, because happy, we know what the word means, has to do with joy, has to do with hope, and autumn awakens in us the feeling of the coming winter and evokes sadness. So he is pitched two different feelings together. He says the autumn fields appear happy because they are full at the moment, they are ready for harvest, and the true fruit trees are laden in the autumn season. The fields are full with grain and with crop ready to be harvested and thrashed. But he says actually they hide that fear of the coming death of the winter season. So he says, in the same way, when the poet is looking at that scene, it's not the happiness that fills him, it is the sense, this deep sense of loss, this deep sense, the sense of death, loss and death, and a foreboding fills him. So he's thinking and reminded of the days which have gone and which will never return to him. So thinking on the present moment, thinking on the present moment of fullness and joy, the full happy autumn season, but hidden in that autumn season is the sense of foreboding, the sense of fear that comes with the season that will follow autumn. So in the same way, the poet does not have a happy feeling when he looks at the autumn fields. In fact, he is reminded of death and loss, and with the reminder of death and loss, the death of his dear friend Arthur Hallam and the loss of his dear friend Arthur Hallam, with the death and with this sense of loss, he's taken back to his past memories. And he says, I think of those old memories, I think of those old cherished times which are now no more. So the whole stanza is complete. The whole stanza has a harmony, because an idea is explored and then it is complete. And then we shall see that each complete stanza is linked to each other, and when we reach the final stanza, the whole poem will appear as a harmonious whole, instead of appearing as breaking down into different parts, disjointed and disconnected. In the second stanza, the poet says, "Fresh as the first beam glittering on a sail that brings our friends up from the underworld, sad as the last which reddens over one that sinks with all we love below the verge, so sad, so fresh, the days that are no more." Now he creates another scene for us, and this is a scene in which these past memories that he talked about in the first stanza, these memories, they are now further compared, and here they are compared to the first and the last beam of sunlight. So this is how the first stanza is connected to the second stanza. He spoke about the memories in the last part of the first stanza, and he takes up that theme in the second stanza, and he uses two similes. He uses two comparisons. He says, fresh as the first beam. And he's talking about memories. These memories, he says, the memories of my past, the memories of my old days, these are as fresh, as beautiful, as alive as the first beam glittering on a sail that brings our friends up from the underworld. He creates before us an image of a vast sea, and then upon the permanence of that sea, a ship is sailing, and when the sun rises up in the east, and it's morning time, the first rays of sun hit upon the sails of the ship, and the ship is alighted. The ship becomes visible. From the darkness it comes to the daylight, and he says, in that first beam of light we can see on the ship our dear friends. So the ship carries the dear friends from the world of darkness to the world of light. This is the image that he has created. But what he wants to say is that the memories are like the fresh beam of light. The memories are as fresh, as vivid, as clear, and as alive as the first beam of light. Meaning, are the memories that are evoked, that have come to the poet, they are vivid, they are clear, they are fresh, and then he gives you that simile. And at the same time he says, and again you see this is a paradox, he says the memories are fresh, but he says at the same time they are sad, sad as a last which reddens over one that sinks with all we love below the verge. Now he reddens over one that sinks. This phrase, in this phrase he's describing the sun, the setting sun. I have not highlighted it here, but you can mark it that when he talks about this in this phrase, when he says reddens over one that sinks, he's talking about the setting sun. So he says that the memories are sad, and they are sad like the last beam of light, like the last reddened beam of sunlight. It is sad because we know that the day has now come to an end, and that day shall never come back again. But the poet is continuing with the same image that he evoked in the previous line. He says, this first beam of light brought back those friends and that ship from the world of darkness to the world of light. But now that the sun is setting, he says, the reddening sun that sinks, it also, as the sun sinks, it also takes away. It also takes this ship with it. So the ship also sinks from view. It disappears from view, taking our friends or our cherished memories away. And then in the last line, he's again reconciling the whole image. He says, so sad, so fresh, the days that are no more. So the paradox is there. He calls those memories of his old days sad and at the same time fresh. But he says they are no more. So the memories are sad for the poet because they remind him that those days can never return, that he can never have those joyous moments again. But he says they're fresh. They're fresh because they're vivid, they're still clear, they're still young in the poet's mind. He can see them, his friend, clearly. He can still feel the cherished memories of his friends. Then stanza 3. In stanza 3, he's going to create another scene for us. He says, ah, sad and strange as in dark summer dawns, the earliest pipe of half-awakened birds, to dying ears, when unto dying eyes the casement slowly grows a glimmering square. So sad, so strange, the days that are no more. So here he is creating for you a scene of a man who's dying, and as he's dying, it is strange for him to listen to the piping or the songs of the young birds. So he's comparing his memories to the feelings of this dying person. He says, ah, you see, again there is pain. There is a sense of loss when he is explaining his emotions. He says, sad and strange, again a simile. As, he says, so these memories are sad and yet they are strange. Again he uses contradictory images. The memories are sad, but at the same time he says they are strange. And when he says sad, he is also linking the third stanza to the second stanza, because he had described the memories as sad in the previous stanza. But now he adds up to the memory, to that idea. He says memories are sad, but they are also strange. As he says, in the dark summer dawns, the earliest pipe of half-awakened birds to dying ears. To dying ears. He says they are as strange as they are to a man who's dying, and he lies awake all night, and when it is the dawn time, he can hear the birds piping, still not fully awakened, because he calls them half-awakened birds. But they're piping, they're singing songs, and their song appears to this dying man's ears as strange, because his life is coming to an end, and it feels strange to him to think of a new life beginning. Then he says, when unto dying eyes the casement slowly grows a glimmering square. He says, and then he brings us to the end of the day. He says, and then before these dying eyes, before this he was using this acoustic imagery, the sense of hearing he was talking about. The dying man is listening to the songs of the birds, and the song feels strange to him because he is dying, he's on deathbed, and he has no hope, and the bird song is a symbol of hope and life. So this is a strange contrast. And then he evokes this image of sight, uses a sensuous imagery of sight. He says, and to the dying eyes, and when that dying man, he sees the casement slowly grows. This is the sun that he's talking about. He's talking about the setting sun. As the glimmering square can be the window through which the dying man can see the sun setting, the red sun setting, going down his window, he says. So, and he watches with a strange feeling the sun going down and the day coming to its close, and which reminds him to his own life coming to an end. So that is the sadness that leaves him with sadness. And again he repeats, he says, so sad, so strange, the days that are no more. He says, in a similar way, my memories are also sad. My memories are also strange. The memories are sad and the memories are strange, because he says, just like this feeling of an old man that he is dying, and his life and his days that he spent can never come back to him, and he has no hope, he says. In the same way, to me, this passing life, or the joys that I see around me, or the birds that I hear around me, he says, all of them appear to be strange, because the poet himself is in that state of mind that he cannot enjoy the beauties of nature. Even the autumn fields leave him with sadness, and even the sunlight brings to him sad memories, and even this birds chirping, birds piping awakens sadness in him. So whatever he sees, all things in nature, instead of giving him hope, instead of giving him happiness, they leave him with a great sadness. Then in the last stanza, he will give us what the critics have cherished so much, that the harmony that he achieves through the poem. Dear as remembered kisses after death, and sweet as those by hopeless fancy waned, on lips that are for others, deep as love, deep as first love, and wild with all regret. O death in life, the days that are no more. Now he will create further images for us before he comes to that conclusion. He says, dear as remembered kisses. The memories are as dear as the remembered kisses after death, and sweet as those by hopeless fancy feigned on lips that are for others. So although he's creating images of happiness, but there is this sense again of loss. There is this sense of deep, deep sadness. He says, he talks about those kisses. He says, but he says they are as the kisses that we remember now, but we remember them because we will no more get them. The kisses from the loved ones, the remembered kisses of the loved ones who are now no more with us. So there is this pain and there is this regret, there is a sense of loss that he's experiencing here. Although the kisses that he got from his loved one, he's saying they must give him happiness. The remembrance of them must give him happiness. But poet says here that for him they are, although they are as dear and as cherished as those memories that he have, but he says they are accompanied with a sense of loss, with a sense of regret, because he will no more be kissed by his beloved. And sweet, he says, as those by hopeless fancy feigned on lips that are for others. And he says those kisses are sweet. They are sweet, but he says to us because we have imagined them, and we have imagined on bestowing kisses on our beloved who was meant for someone else. And so here he's talking about the memories, how they are cherished, how they are beautiful, because they are all part of fancy. because they are all part of our imagination, and that is why they are rich, that is why they are dear, and at the same time they are a reminder of a loss, they are a reminder of regret, they are a reminder of a sadness. And then he says these memories are also deep as love. They are as deep as love, deep as first love, he tells us, and while with all regret. Again you see the contrast. He compares the memories with love, and he says that they are as precious as the first love. But then he gives us a contrast, and there is this ambiguity in the line, and he says they may be as deep and they may be as true as the first love, but he says these memories, they are also wild and they are filled up with regret. So you see with the Tennyson's is throughout his poem, he's obsessed with these contrasts, especially through this last stanza. We see that he's comparing, he's imagining happy moments, but then he is talking about the sense of loss, and then he's also talking about the feeling of regret, as he does here when he's remembering his first love. And in the last line then he concludes and harmonizes, and he says, "O death in life, the days that are no more." In this line he is lamenting upon the transitoriness of life. He says that the life is not permanent, that the life is transitory, and this is why he describes his own life as death in life. He says, "I am living, but my life is like death." So you may also notice that death is written with a capital D and life is written with capital N, which means they are both personified. But he's trying to emphasize that his life without his friend, that his life without his beloved is like death. So the poet is lamenting and regretting over the time that he spent with his friend and that he can have no more. So throughout the poem and in all four stanzas he has talked about the same theme. He's talked about the temporariness of life, he's talked about the transitoriness of life, and he's talked about the permanence of nature that he also explored in the previous poem, because you see he was continuously pitching nature with man and man's feelings and emotions. So let us now briefly analyze the poem. Now Tennyson himself said that Tears, Idle Tears was about the passion of the past, and that the yearning that young people occasionally experience for that which seems to have passed away from them forever. So you see, these lines are important, this expression is important, because these are Tennyson's own words, and he has summarized for you the theme of the whole poem. He says that the poem is about the passion of the past, so this is why it is nostalgic in tone. He's reviving the memories of the past, he's burning with the passion of the past, he's yearning for his past, and he's comparing it to the yearning of the young people, because he says which these young people experience for what seems to have passed away from them forever. So it is the losses, it is about the losses, it is about what they had and what they now no more have. So this is what the poem tries to explore, and this is what the poet has also tried to explore through different images that he creates in each stanza. Tennyson has explained that the idea came to him when he was at Tintern Abbey, not far from Hallam's burial place. So once again in the poem you see the poet himself is describing his own personal grief. The poem may be generalized to anyone's sense of loss or grief, but for the poet, the poem specifically has an autobiographical and a personal note. And we can also compare it to Tintern Abbey, because when at Tintern Abbey, Wordsworth himself composed the poem, which I have discussed with you, lines composed upon Tintern Abbey, and it can offer us an interesting comparison, because if you remember in his poem, Wordsworth also spoke about the past memories, the past joys, and he also talked about the different experiences of his past. But he tells us, Wordsworth tells us in the end, that he was compensated for those losses. He established new relationships later on as he grew older. But in this poem we see that Tennyson continuously laments that the days that are no more. In a last line of every stanza, the refrain, the line that is repeated, tells us what the poet is actually feeling and what he wants to convey. He says, the days that are no more. So he says they are irreplaceable, they can never be replaced, and he feels that he has not been compensated. So this is the change between the two poets. This is the difference in the attitude of the two poets. So with this I come to the close of this poem also. But you can see that the two poems that I discussed today, they shared similar ideas and they shared similar themes. But the important thing was how Tennyson has employed these devices and how he's used the contradictions and the paradoxes. But in the end he's tried to achieve a harmony and a harmonious whole from his poems. In the next lecture we will look at some other poems by Tennyson, and I take leave now. Thank you.